Hey everyone, and welcome to the AWS Nordics office hours with me, Gunnar Grosch. I am a developer advocate here at AWS and based in the Nordics. And this is our weekly show where I bring on guests to talk about a specific topic and let you, our viewers, ask your questions. And hopefully, by the end of this hour, you've learned something new on that topic. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments throughout the hour, just post them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer those. And this week, I'm joined by Asif Mujawar. I believe, Asif, you're a specialist solutions architect for database. Is that correct?
Indeed. Hey, Gunnar. Thanks for inviting me. I'm so honored to be on this show. It's something I like to evangelize, and I like to join and chat up to people like you. So, just quick introduction of myself. I'm Asif Mujawar. I'm a senior database specialist, based out of London, part of the EMEA database specialist team. Work with customers like enterprise customers across the globe, where I'm helping them solve the database challenges when it comes to moving from on-premises into the cloud, and at the same time breaking free of the legacy technologies, legacy database platforms into the cloud. So basically, typically you would say moving away from Oracle and SQL Server. And today's topic is really goes into that very well. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, so you touched on it there, that the topic for today is breaking free of a Microsoft SQL Server and using Babelfish for Aurora PostgreSQL. And Babelfish, I believe it was announced at reInvent last year. Is that correct, Asif?
Indeed. So we announced Babelfish last year in reInvent. So Andy Jassy came out with that good announcement that, because, what we see in customers in the past is basically have been looking to break away from SQL Server, and we have a tool called Schema Conversion Tool, which allows them to do that. But at the same time, what we had is basically didn't have a tool available that could convert and take away the major pain point from the customers, that is the application. And this is where customers always kept coming back and asking us that question: do you have something that will allow us to seamlessly migrate an application from SQL Server into Aurora open source, like be it MySQL or Postgres? And at that point, SCT was the way, and SCT does the database conversion, but there's nothing really available that can convert an application. And this is where we have seen a lot of customers struggled because of the legacy code, because of their processes, and basically resource constraint. And this is where we picked up on that feedback, as we love working backwards from the customer feedback. And this is where we then came up with this Battlefish that allows customers to migrate their legacy application from SQL Server into Aurora open source. So that's basically allows move away from this application and give that customers really want that freedom, particularly from one vendor. We all know and we all love, but that vendor basically established a cloud computing licensing policy that effectively doubled the licensing costs for many of these customers who run on the cloud or run on our cloud, basically, and doubling the prices for the customer to run the cloud they choose. That's not really more customer centric. So a company that would do this is not just most customer hostile IT company, but as the most customer hostile company in the world. So this is where we then came up and said we got to do something, and this is how Battlefish is born. So Battlefish for Aurora Postgres is a new capability for Amazon Aurora PostgreSQL Compatible edition that enables Aurora to understand the commands from applications written for Microsoft SQL Server. And Babelfish is a built-in capability for Amazon Aurora, and doesn't have any additional cost, like an additional bolt cost or anything. So you can enable the Babelfish on your Amazon Aurora cluster with just a few clicks and RDS Management Console. And with Babelfish, it understands the T-SQL commands, the Microsoft SQL Server's proprietary SQL dialect, and supports the same communication protocol, TDS. That's the so your apps that were originally written for SQL Server can now work with Aurora with fewer code changes or next to nothing. As a result, the effort required to modify this application from SQL Server 2005 or about, to Aurora is reduced and leading to faster, low risk, and most cost-effective migrations.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point around Babelfish, that just moving the data from one database to another, that's pretty easy, to be honest. But it is that making the changes to your application that was previously needed, those are perhaps the biggest pain points in switching between different databases. So Aurora, or Babelfish rather, makes that easier. We're going to see examples of that throughout the episode as well. So I think you had a couple of quick slides to show us as well. So can you please bring up your screen share? I know the viewers of the show know that we don't use slides that much, but I think we have a couple that helps us make sense of Babelfish.
Absolutely, and I just wanted to quickly, as you said, the viewers on the Twitch doesn't really like they have the slides, and rather they want to look at the hands-on and see the real technology. But don't worry, folks, we will get to the real technology in a demo. But I just wanted to build some of the context for you folks to understand where we come in and why Babelfish. So Babelfish first PostgreSQL. So most of the company, like we briefly touched upon while we discussed how Babelfish was announced and why it was announced. So most of the time, like the people running SQL Server platforms, they are basically locked into these proprietary platforms, restricted innovation. As customers are locked in, they can't really do anything about. So your modernization or your innovation is kind of locked into the perimeter that's set up by the vendor. And most of the customers we've been speaking to don't like that perimeter, because they want the technological freedom. They just want it to innovate in whatever shape or form they want to do, rather than having to worry about, does this feature going to be supported on the AWS platform which I'm running on? So that just takes away the future or the innovation capabilities from the organization, and then they don't want to do that. And this is where customers end up with these monolithic architectures, and then makes it difficult for customers to scale and iterate to support emerging use cases. And at the same time, you have the punitive licensing tactics threatening customers with licensing audits. As we talk to the hundreds of enterprise customers on the relationship they have with their AWS vendors, they all talk about how they felt locked in by providers. They are expensive with proprietary offerings, they are punitive licensing terms, and oh, by the way, occasionally you get an email that says you are being audited. So they are outright hostile to their customers, and our customers are tired of it, and they want freedom. And this is where Babelfish comes in. So as I spoke about, currently you have an application that is running on a SQL Server using a TDS endpoint and using a T-SQL language to talk to application. So where do we want customers to get to is an application that's using a Postgres endpoint, using a PL/SQL or PG/SQL endpoint, using Aurora Postgres. So we had a tool available called Schema Conversion Tool. That's basically converted the schema from SQL Server into Aurora. And then we had the DMS tool, that there was migration service, that migrated the data for us. But most of the customers, like I discussed earlier, that there is nothing to do that on application level. So what they need to do is basically they write the T-SQL code, they need to rewrite the app code, they need to switch the drivers. There's quite a lot of stuff involved. And this is where most of the customers got, it's just legacy application. We don't understand, we don't have resources, we don't have time. And they're kind of stuck with the SQL Server. So this is where Babelfish then gives that answer, is to an application which has a capability of interacting with the database as if it's talking to on a TDS endpoint, understanding T-SQL on a port 1433, and now also provides a way for the customers to continue or develop their application using the future language, which is the PSQL or PG/SQL on a Postgres endpoint using the default port of 5432. So what does that give you? Your legacy application code remains written for SQL Server, so you don't have to really change that right from day one. We will provide you client drivers, that doesn't need to be changed. New application code can be written directly to Postgres. So my modernization journey can, in fact, kick off parallelly on day one itself. So you don't have to worry about, I need to convert the schema first, need to bring it to Postgres, and then start about developing the new code, which is Postgres compatible. With the Babelfish, you can simply move the data, switch it to SQL Server, and then start thinking about how you're going to modernize your application once you landed in the Aurora itself, rather than having to do this upfront. And that's the game changer here. That's what I wanted to share with you folks today, because I'm going to call that first. No more slides, and this is my last slide, I promise.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, I think this is really interesting, especially conversations I've had with customers and builders out there. It's just that it's been hard to move away from MS SQL into some of the more open alternatives that we have, for instance, moving to Postgres. And Babelfish, when it was announced at re:Invent last year, it was quite hyped by a lot of people in the community. So really excited to see it being generally available now. So then tell us a bit more about how you go about migrating into Babelfish or using Babelfish.
Yeah, so that's a very good question, right? As you called out, it was really hard. And I'll tell you what, since we announced the Babelfish, there was quite a lot of people signing up the POC. So we have about good 2,000 or more than 2,000 customers logged in for preview straight away as soon as we announced. But since then, it has been enormously adopted by the customers across the globe. And there's quite a lot of good use cases that has come out, which is going to be available for you folks at some point in the future, where you can look at the reference architecture, how customers have done on a Babelfish. But I can tell you that there is a lot of customers are running quite good workload on a Babelfish since we have gone GA. So before I dive into the migration use case, I just want to quickly talk about how we developed the Babelfish and why we did the way the Babelfish was done. So Babelfish is an open source system, right? So this is not is driven by the community now. So you can actually drive the roadmap of the product. Like in AWS, we love customers to drive our roadmap, and we always work backwards from the customers, what customer wants to see on the products. And this is where the SA roles, what we have is to go and talk to the customers like yourselves, and then understand the requirement, and then drive the roadmap. And now we have gone a step further, where we have said we're going to put the Babelfish as an open source outside, where people can simply drive the agenda and drive the roadmap, how the product could look like. So I'm sure Gunnar will put out the links in the chat at some point. So please feel free to go there. This is an open source project, so you can contribute to this Babelfish development and go through some of the FAQs and stuff like that. But like I said, the Babelfish came about is a customer requirement to have something to allow the modernization journey easier. Secondly, we wanted to make it open source so people can drive the agenda, people can contribute towards it, so make it more open source. And thirdly, the tenets of the Babelfish development, what we carried upon is we don't want to lose the application correctness. We want to have something that can work with the TDS, which is the transparent protocol for SQL Server for running the T-SQL commands. But at the same time, we want to have something that can operate on a P-SQL protocol as well. So that's the big thing. And then within that, the design tenet, what we had, we want to have as much closer to the SQL Server behavior when it comes to Babelfish. So when we run the code at the error codes, you will see the same error code that been returned by the Babelfish endpoint rather than a Postgres error code. So for example, if you run something and it ends up with error code 500, for example, that will be SQL Server error code, what you've been seeing or what you used to see, rather than something entirely new. So we have matched the error codes, what you see on their side. But again, the design tenet, like I said, it's an open source. So folks, give it a go.
So just a question there. It doesn't have 100% coverage right now. You can't take everything that perhaps was built previously using MS SQL and whatever programming language, and it will just work. There might be cases where things don't work yet, since it's something still under development.
Absolutely, and that's a really good question. So, like in every other product, so when they go live, we have tried to cover as much as possible coverage of SQL Server, what we can do. So there is a tool available called Compass, which is compatibility assessment tool. Again, that's available on a GitHub, so you can download that and then you can run this tool against the SQL Server. So what we expect you to do is just click on the SQL Server, generate the DDL commands. So that will script all the objects out in the database, all your views, tables, functions, procedures, and whatnot. That will nice looking that SQL file. Then you can pass it to this Compass tool. What Compass tool will do, it will evaluate what things are currently supported in Babelfish and what things currently not supported. It's not that big list, but there is something that's currently not available there. So you can simply look at Babelfish, and so you can make an informed decision about how you're going to drive your platform to the open source. So like SCT, schema conversion tool, that interrogates and that tells you everything. Similar sort of thing, what we have is Compass. That Compass is then going to go evaluate and tell you what features your currently database have, like number of line of codes, number of procedures, number of functions, and so on and so forth. And within that, it will call out very specifically that you're using this particular function that is currently supported. There is a function about that is currently not supported in a Babelfish. I hope that answers the question.
I think that's great. I'm reading comments. Meanwhile, Top Swag Code writes about what he's tried, and he found something that wasn't supported. So I suppose that might happen. I'm not sure exactly which comment to bring up. Let's bring up this one. I said, in the end, that said, it was fun to try and will make a migration a lot easier, but you're going to have some groundwork to do before you change to Postgres with Babelfish. And I guess it's like we pretty much every time say when we talk about specific use cases, it depends. It depends on your use case and what you're using right now.
Absolutely, like I said, like you rightly said, it depends, because there is not one size fits all, right? I wish we could have one size fits all, and then we can just create a pattern that fits well every single customer, and happy days, we got a solution. Unfortunately, that's not the real world. Real world have different characteristics and different attributes of each workload. So it depends how your application interacts, what kind of data types you have, what kind of features you're using within the application, and some of the legacy code. So what we say Babelfish is based upon SQL 2014. That's the base version we're looking at. So anything that is running up to SQL 2014 or below that's a benchmark for Babelfish. But having said that, we're not saying that it's not 2016, or if your database is running on 2016, 2017, or 2019, that's not supported now. But what we're saying that TDS protocol compatibility is 7.0, and we have baseline Babelfish on 2014. So that's where it is. At the same time, that question was really nice there in terms of the groundwork. With any migration you do, right, we all have to do a groundwork. There is going to be that element of doing the groundwork. And for Babelfish, Compass, which is compatibility assessment tool, that's the basic groundwork I would recommend you to do, and I would do myself, because the thing is that if I want to know what my future looks like, I want to do it right now, rather than having to go onto the target side and then realize, oh, there are things that don't work. So it would be nice to know what things going to work and what things not going to work, and that way Compass is going to help you there. So that's the only groundwork I would say to start with, because that will set you off the success criteria, how successful your database migration would be on a Babelfish.
I posted a link to Compass in the chat as well, so do check that out. And that is in the GitHub organization for Babelfish as well. And if you encounter things that does not work, well, as it's open source, as you mentioned a few times, raise an issue in the repos for Babelfish. That helps us continue the development of it as well. All right, so you were talking about the design of Babelfish when we took a bit of another path there. So you want to continue there, Asif?
Yeah, so in terms of the migration paths, right? So what we have is basically you can have the homegrown applications, which are currently developed by in-house by the customers, or you have the database agnostic applications, or you have an application that is given by the ISV to you. So these are some of the things which I typically look at, the applications that are basically pretty much straight away going into a Babelfish. But in terms of migration parts, I would say there are three ways to look at this, right? Like I said before, like you can right click and create the DDL and then run the compatibility assessment tool, and that will give you the incompatibilities for you to look at. Or then you can import the adjusted DDL into Babelfish with SSMS or dbeaver. So you don't have to do the SCD conversion. That's the big point here. You don't have to convert the schema before you use Babelfish. So in the past, before you go to Aurora PostgreSQL, you have to convert the schema to Postgres compatible and then move the DMS to migrate the data. What we're saying here, no, you can simply within SSMS, right click, create the DDL, and as long as you have done the assessment tool first, and then you know what works and what doesn't work, and then you can then take that DDL export, the adjusted DDL export, and then run it on SQL Server or on either SSMS or dbeaver. And then we can use the DMS to import the data.
So question from Anurag, how compatible is it with Vanilla PostgreSQL?
How compatible is it with the Vanilla PostgreSQL? Now, here is the thing. Babelfish is SQL Server compatible, right? So when it comes to Vanilla PostgreSQL, you will have all the features of Vanilla PostgreSQL, and that will be because in the diagram what you see, you have the SQL TDS endpoint coming in as well as a pSQL endpoint coming in. So we are currently running on Postgres 13.4. That's the version. Postgres version we have based the Babelfish on. So anything that is available on 13.4 will be available in a Babelfish. Plus, all the Aurora features, what you have, like a CCM, QPM, the read replicas, all of those Aurora goodies, what you get out of Aurora service, will be there for you.
But maybe we can ask the question this way instead, so that it's clear. Do you have to use Babelfish with Aurora PostgreSQL or RDS PostgreSQL, or can you use it with your own installation of PostgreSQL?
Oh, okay, I see the point. No, it's only available on Aurora Postgres at this stage. I'm not 100% sure about because at the moment this is purely on Aurora.
All right, good, cool. All right, Asif. Let's see. No, that's what's the questions for now. So, losing myself in all of the tabs here. Sorry about that. So how should we continue now? Is it time to jump into show something, or or do we? Is there something else you want to explain first, Asif?
I just want to talk about what we support. Very quickly, just to show the evolution of the product. So, since we started, we have the support for triggers, so procedure, cursor, nested transaction, to the table value, the TVFs, the table value function, all the data types. What we have, the save point, the static cursors, and that's what we currently do. And since we started back in the reInvent, that's when we announced the preview, and we have come a long way in terms of since we gone live. So we have better TDS and SSL support, the TLS support, we have the table data type support, we have dynamic SQL, exec with the parameter and SP execute SQL, we have better SQL Server SQL transaction semantics, and we have introduced lots and lots of error codes that's basically gives you that native SQL Server feel within on a Postgres. And then we have added a lot of collision support. We have added a lot of output clock support and case sensitivity. That's one of the things we picked up from the preview. In terms of support of the tools, what I wanted to call it really is about the SSMS is what we say. What we will see in the demo. dbeaver is what we recommend because it's being platform agnostic and that can talk to SQL and the Postgres at the same time. SQL CMD, and then probably you have any other tools for your mileage that might vary. So what we're looking at is about like a VS Code as well that could be available for you to do the SQL development using the Battlefish endpoint. In terms of assessment, I would say quickly, you have the compass, use that as well. But you can do the SCT assessment tool, but do not convert the schema. If you do convert the schema, then you're taking away the benefit Battlefish brings in. That means you're embarking on a longer journey of modernization. With SCT, you can just simply assess the schema, and that's about it. But I would rather... Sorry,
yeah, what benefit would that give to do that?
With SCT, I mean, there are customers who want to see what my future roadmap looks like if I want to go Postgres native.
Okay.
What am I looking at? So that gives you, like, you know, if I have an example, a schema that's running on SQL Server, and I want to assess, like, you know, how long would it take for me to go Postgres native? Is it 12 months? Is it 6 months? Or is it 2 months? Whereas with the Babelfish, if you run that, you have a data point, like, you know, within a week, if I address this particular functionality, I can go live within a week on a Babelfish without a lot of transformation. So it's good to have 2 data points. One data point that tells you how compatible you are with a Babelfish running on a PostgreSQL, like as if you're running on SQL Server. And then it's a good data point to, if I were to go native on a Postgres and to transform everything, how long that's going to take. So it gives you two data points to make that informed decision about which way you're going to fall.
But is the recommendation to use Babelfish as a migration path, or is it something that you would continue to use over time as well? Or do you use Babelfish and then switch over sometime?
Right, that's a good point. So Babelfish is not a sticky tip. It's not a temporary solution. Babelfish is there as long as you want to run. So we're not asking customers to convert the schema completely to Postgres, but end goal for customer is to move away, break free of this legacy technology at some point. So we will leave the choice down to the customer to decide how long, because there is no timeline. We haven't time framed the Babelfish. Say, like, you can only run for 12 months, you can run only for 6 months. You can run it for as long as you are happy and you're converting. But what we're doing by enabling customers to do this by Babelfish is allowing customers to start developing the new version of their application code compatible with Postgres at their own pace, at their own time, and with their own release cycles, rather than having to enforce the timeline from our side. We are leaving that decision point on the customer side. And this is what customer wanted from us, that they wanted to have that independence of technological choices by themselves rather than having to be enforced by somebody. And that's what Babelfish does.
That makes sense. And what are you seeing so far? It hasn't been out that long, but what are you seeing so far? Or how are customers using it right now?
So most of the customers what I've been speaking to, a couple of customers have already gone live with their applications where they're running some sort of business critical applications. And there are 3 customers who I'm speaking to who are basically going through the motions of converting some of the stuff which is not available. For example, what they're doing a pivot strategy. What is currently supported on Babelfish, they're moving into Babelfish, and what is not currently supported in Babelfish, they're leaving on SQL Server. Because we support a lot of SQL Server functionality for them, there is a seamless interaction between these 2 different platforms. So which is what they love in it, that they're able to pivot the strategy for being a big bang approach. They're now doing a piecemeal approach. And that's what I've seen most of the customers are doing it for 2 approaches. Either they can go live straight into the Battlefish, a whole thing that is supported, but also there are customers who are doing a piecemeal, that half of the stuff is supported, so I'm going to push that to Battlefish and leave others. So that way they were able to drop the number of licenses required to run the SQL Server.
Right.
Either on premises or in EC2.
Oh, but that's interesting. Cool.
Cool. So I think it's probably time for if I can though quickly show you what is Babelfish. Like now, I've been talking about this for a good half an hour, and customers are people like you're itching to see how does a Babelfish looks like. So
yes,
here we go. Let me share my screen and I'll walk you through how to create a Babelfish cluster, and then we will look into and then we'll look at the end-to-end demo.
See if we get your screen up.
Yeah, I am just getting my screen up in a second.
And in the meantime, if you just join us, this is the AWS Nordics office hours. I'm joined by Asif. Today, we're talking about breaking free from MS SQL by using Babelfish. And there we go. Asif, your screen is shared.
Lovely. So this is the lovely AWS console, well, everybody's aware of. So I'm in my RDS console, and what I've done, I've just gone into Create Database tab.
Let's zoom in a couple of steps, makes it easier for all the viewers.
Yeah, so if you go into the RDS console and you just hit the Create Database, and that way you come to the screen I was on.
Yeah, I mean zoom in, so make the text
zoom in
a bit larger. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
If I can, bear with me. Let me just do that.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's great. Perfect.
Cool. Right, so here we go. So what I'm doing in the RDS console is just hit the create database, and this is how you would create the RDS, the Aurora clusters or RDS clusters. So I'm just going to go into standard create, and I'll use the engine option Amazon Aurora. Now you can notice we have Aurora compatible with MySQL as well as with Postgres. So Babelfish is available on Postgres, so I'll just enable that. And you can see here now we have a lot of versions of Postgres that is available on Aurora. But as soon as I go into the filters and I say only show me the version that are currently supported on a Babelfish, then you can see it dropped down to only one, which is 13.4. That's what we have based our Babelfish product on. Cool. Everything else is pretty much standard. You can give the name Babelfish, Aurora Lab or something, blah, blah, blah. Again, this is a master username, which is what you will connect to the cluster. Standard stuff, nothing taken away from the Aurora if the people know how to create Aurora. But for the new people, very quickly, this is what you will use to connect to the RDS cluster, which has the admin privileges to do a lot of changes. And then provide the master username and password. Then choose the DB class. You can have R class or T class. So we'll just go with R class, R6G large. Multi-AZ deployment. That is recommended for production workloads. But if you have a dev workload where you don't have to worry about high availability or any RTO or RPO, then you can just simply say, don't create me Aurora read replica. But if you do choose this option, then you have an option of creating another read replica once you have created the cluster. But for production workloads, I would strongly recommend to use that from get-go. Then choose the VPC, whatever you want to use. Provide the security group, which allows the connectivity on port 5432, which is Postgres port, and 1433, that is SQL Server port. Just make sure whatever security group you choose has got those two ports enabled. Otherwise, the Babelfish will not work. And the key thing to remember, turn on the Babelfish extension. So Babelfish is not a service. It's an enhancement or additional feature on Aurora PostgreSQL. So we just need to enable that additional feature or extension on Aurora Postgres. And basically authentication, we'll just leave password authentication, and comes the additional configuration. You see there, you will get the parameter group. Now, if you have a parameter group, which you have currently using, you can choose existing parameter group and choose that. And then we will add you will have to set the RDS Babelfish status parameter turned on. If not, we will create a new. I would recommend you to create a new, and then you can tune it later, whatever tunings you have done. So that makes your life easy. So you can have a parameter group just for Babelfish rather than having to use existing parameter group or PostgreSQL and having Postgres native parameter group messing with Babelfish or Babelfish messing with the existing parameter group. Then coming down into the database migration mode, this is a key point, and I'd like to grab your attention here. The single database is basically you have a SQL Server which has only one database hosted. So you can have one single database mode. But if you have multiple databases hosted within a SQL Server, then I would rather go multiple. I mean, you wouldn't imagine a customer having a single database within one single instance. You will have multiple, but just in case if you're a SaaS provider, then you would go single database per instance. But typically, most of the customers I've seen, they will go multi-database. And this is why we're just having... Some of the customers did ask for that. We want to have a cluster per database. So you have an option of single database per cluster. But typically, most of the customers I've seen going multiple databases. But I'll show you the difference when it comes to single versus multiple when we go into this. And lovely. Look at this. We have the collision available because SQL Server, this is purely SQL Server stuff. Nothing to do with the Postgres. But we do have all the SQL Server collations available here. that typically used by other standard from most of the customers. And then our lovely 1433 port, because that's where we want the TDS to interact upon, and the parameter group. And everything else is pretty much straightforward, same. And then you scroll down and enable the Postgres log. I would strongly recommend you to do so. So if the DBAs are in the house, or the DB people who want to know what's my PostgreSQL database is doing, is it really talking to SQL Server wise, then you can enable the Postgres log and you can watch in the cloud, in your CloudWatch to see how it's enabling the Babelfish on your cluster, and it's accepting 1433 along with 5432, just for people like who wants to go dive a bit deeper, like myself. And then you can, the rest is pretty much standard maintenance windows for migration or your version upgrades, and then you can have the enabling the deletion protection. I would strongly recommend have this enabled. Otherwise, you don't want people to drop your production database all of a sudden, like, thinking like I did it myself, like, back in the days when I was fresh out of uni, somebody give me a database and say, hey, you're a DBA now. And I went, that's fine. I want to test my drop command. And I tested the drop command on the UAT. So it wasn't a production by UAT. Here we go. That's why you want that enable deletion production there.
I don't think you are a real DBA or developer if you haven't dropped a database either in production or close to production.
Absolutely. And that's a baptism, right? If you don't do that, you're not baptized. So to get baptized, you have to drop something. Cool, lovely. And you just hit the create database. So I'm just going to cancel it because I already have a database created here.
A couple of questions there. Are you able to enable it afterwards? So if you already have a cluster in place, can you enable Babelfish on existing cluster?
As long as it's 13.4.
All right. And is there a point to enabling it even though you don't know if you're going to use it on your cluster?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily do that because it could be as long as you want to test it, but you have to have a use case to do so. Like, if you want to evangelize like myself, then yes, why not? I will do it. I will test it and I'll confirm everything works. But from the customer point of view, if you have a SQL Server workload that you're looking to migrate, then enable the endpoint. Otherwise, but again, there is no cost attached to the Battlefish enabling on our cluster. It's completely free.
Is there overhead on the instances if it's not being used?
No, it's only in action when it's using, right?
Okay. Cool.
Cool. So we have these clusters created called Aurora Battlefish EU Lab and Single DB Battlefish Lab. So I'll show you that in a second, what I mean by single DB and a multiple DB. So here I have got a Windows machine, which is connected to those two databases. So the Battlefish EU Lab, remember I've selected as a multiple databases. So what we do by default, when you enable the Babelfish on the Battlefish cluster, we create a container called Battlefish_DB. And this is where all of your SQL Server databases will be landing. And then when they will land as a schema rather than a database. But I'll show that in a few moments. So let's just look at the existing application and existing SQL Server, what we have. So I've got this database called Babelfish sample DB, as you can see on my screen on the left-hand side. That is
it possible to zoom in a bit there?
I'm not 100% sure how I can
I'm not sure either.
But let's see.
Check on the view. In the studio instead.
Okay, in the management studio.
Yeah, so on the.
Oh, okay, here we go. That's 200%.
That was big.
Okay, how is that? Is that better?
That works for me.
All right, cool. So what we have is a Battlefish sample DB as our Postgres, as our SQL Server schema. So, like I said, I'm just simply going to right-click, tasks, and generate script. Apologies, I'm not going to show the compass here because, unfortunately, I don't think we have enough time to go through the compass. So I'll just go through the steps and then possibly a future topic for campus at some point. And then what we can do, we can just simply pick up the stuff which you want to do. You can do the entire database. but the entire database will script out the holistic of creating the data files and so on and so forth. But when you create the data files, that means it's accessing the file system with the C/blah, blah, blah. But on a Postgres, there is no C/. Everything's Linux-based in the background. So that's why the file system is different. So which is why I would rather do it this way, the way I'm doing it, and then schemas. And then you can simply select and create a new window, and that should do that. So I already have it created here. So this is the DDL, which is produced for my application, for my SQL Server. So what I'm going to do quickly, I'm going to run this. And here we go. The database has changed to master and has created a Battlefish _ sample DB on Battlefish enable endpoint. So I'm running in SSMS and I'm connected to Battlefish endpoint, and I've run the SQL Server command as if I'm running against SQL Server on a Battlefish. How good is that?
That's cool.
Cool. So bear with me. So the next thing I wanted to show you folks is basically, let's go into Battlefish and see what I've been saying. Is it really true? If I can get my mouse working, apologies, I've got some settings on the screen that I need to change. Mac sometimes does do this to me. My mouse is sensitive and it just flips my screens. Cool. We'll close that. Lovely. Let's go back in and let's find out what's going on here. So like I was saying, right, as we create the schemas, I ran the database. So let's just refresh it. So when you create the cluster, you by default get the master _ DBO, temp _ DBO. That's basically simulating your master database and temp DB database as if in a SQL Server. That's the basic schemas you get out of the box. So this is vanilla Babelfish _ DB when you create the cluster for the first time before you create the database. And I'll refresh that. Now here we go. I've got two schemas. So my Battlefish sample DB has two schemas called DBO and production. So that has been replicated. And I've got 29 tables under Battlefish _ DBO schema. And I've got a couple of tables in my production schema. So at this stage, I don't have any data whatsoever that's coming through. So all I have is an empty cluster with just the structure and the storage objects and the procedures. I forgot to show you the procedures as well. So I've got all my codes, which has been replicated as well. And you can see this is SQL Server compatible. It's not native Postgres, right? And at this stage, what I wanted to do is bring in my DMS service. So I'm just going to go quickly in my, not DNS, if I can get my fat fingers moving today. Database migration service, DMS. Close though. There we go. So what I have got is a DMS as for the folks looking at the DMS for the first time. So DMS has three basic components. So first being endpoint that allows me to connect to source and target endpoints. And then I have the replication instance that basically drives the replication. And then I have the migration task then which runs on this replication instance by using the endpoints. So I've got the endpoints here, which is basically a SQL Server endpoint for the source, and the target endpoint, you will notice it's native to PostgreSQL. It's not SQL Server. And then I've created a task here called Babelfish migration MS SQL to PG SQL, and that's basically just telling me to go through all the tables which are available in DBO as well as that are available in the that are available in the production schema. Now, I'm not necessarily going to go through the creation of a task, but there will be a block coming out which will walk you through the end-to-end process, but watch out for that. But here we go. We've been replicating tables on the background. That's basically doing a lot of data that's being moved into my Postgres. So we'll look at like 57 million rows that's been replicated into the Aurora side. So let's just go. I've got a simple application called inventory management, which is basically, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to rerun. So what this application is currently doing, oh God, look at that. I've got a problem. When the demo comes, this is where the problem starts. Right, I just need to do one thing where it's using. Okay, so control. Oh yeah, here we go.
It's not really a live demo if there isn't some sort of issue.
Oh, that's fine. We got it. We got it working. All right, here we go. So what this thing is telling us, basically, just to give you a quick walkthrough of the application itself. It's a very basic application with the inventory management system. So what I have done in the background before I fired up my application, I went into, let me just go to my Solution Explorer, if I can, to the web config. So that's the only change I have done. Everything else is literally SQL Server compatible. Then I have put in my dbcon, which talks to my local host, which is my SQL Server with Battlefish sample DB. And then I've got my Battlefish endpoint, which is the dbcon Babel. So that will talk to the Battlefish. So I'm literally going to go in there and just going to go to dbcon Babel. That tells me that I'm connected to localhost and Battlefish sample DB. Log in. Similar sort of thing, like in a user configuration, just create a user, blah, 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 and let's product registration. So let's just do a quick product registration.
And this was towards localhost.
Yeah, this is connecting to localhost, as you can see on the top. You're connected to localhost. That is connected to SQL Server. Don't know why my screen is not enabled, but I'll just do one thing. Okay, I'm going to go to 2. So I've got 9 products. I'm just going to insert another product called 10. And let's just say Amazon. Let's just insert, give me a product.
An existing one.
Yeah, let's just go for Amazon AIML or something like that.
Yeah.
And let's just talk about, in fact, SageMaker, rather than, let's use a product name, SageMaker. That's what I was looking for. And then we just say manufacturer is AWS and quantity saved that blank. So we have 10 records. So we've done some data modification. Let's just go and confirm that on the SQL Server side first. So I'm going to run a select on a TBL_product. Here we go. I've got SageMaker added in here. Now let's just see, has the DMS done the trick, which it's supposed to do? Here we go. TBL product is inserted one row. So that's gone through to the other side. So if I can go in and fire up a select now onto my Babelfish enabled endpoint, which is TBL_product, I'll just go simply again. Let me just show you the endpoint I'm connected to, Babelfish EU Lab. I forgot to tell you how to connect. So the way I'm connecting to Babelfish at the moment via SSMS, you can only connect via new query. You cannot do the Object Explorer. The reason why you can't do Object Explorer, because you don't have a syscatalogs available in Postgres. Postgres syscatalogs are different than Postgres SQL Server catalogs. So hence the reason the Object Explorer currently not supported, but hence the reason you will just do new query, and then you can just go in the connection and type in the connection username and password and simply connect, nothing else. There is no default database or nothing, so you can simply say that. So what I'm going to do, by default, when you connect, it connects to the master, and then you can simply say, hey, I want to connect to Babelfish sample DB, or you have created another database called Babelfish_123, or another database called, say, Gunnar or Asif. So you can use and switch your context of the database like you switch into the SQL Server. So I'm just going to simply say that. Okay, yeah, I know why it is, because fat fingers again. So Battlefish sample DB, that exists. Here we go. Lovely. And I'm just going to say, hey, select star from dbo.tbl_product. And here we go. SageMaker is available on the Postgres. So we have done modifications. So let's just go back in the application and log out. And let's just prove the application works on a Babelfish. As you can see, I'm connected to Babelfish cluster here. And most of the people you'll be thinking this is going to break for sure. And I'm hoping not to. Here we go. It works. Wow. I've got the username, same thing, same user code. I didn't change any code whatsoever. All right. I'm going to go into product registration and let's just look at, can I see my SageMaker? Hey, bingo. I can see my SageMaker. Now let's just delete that SageMaker from here. It's gone. No code changes whatsoever. Now, let's just confirm back in the SQL Server. You have SageMaker, so SQL Server still retains the changes. What about my Babelfish? This is where I've done the changes. No, because what we've done, we have a one-way communication. The data is replicating from SQL Server to into Babelfish, but once you got into Babelfish, Babelfish doesn't know how to go back to SQL Server. So that's the key thing here. But folks, that's what I wanted to show you. I hope you kind of liked it. But there's one more thing I wanted to show you before I wrap up. Is basically, let me just show you in terms of procedures. So like, this is good. You have shown us a very good thing. But what about procedures? Can you talk about that? So here we go. I've got procedures here in the SQL Server. So I've got the USB get bill of materials. This is standard stuff, right?
But
so,
Asif, just mention quickly what a procedure is.
So stored procedure is a programmatical construct or block of programs or block of stored procedures which you can write to simulate your business logic. So for example, you have an order coming in and the order needs to do life cycle, like comes in, check the stocks, then adds an order, receives the payment and stuff like that. So I can put that into one procedure as one single programmatical block, or I can have multiple programmatical blocks. So it's just the way you can have your programmatical blocks retained on a SQL Server. So it's a stored procedure. That's the way. That's an option you have, or you can do functions or whatnot. But this is what typically the developers like done in the past, where they will put the programmatical blocks in a procedural construct that can be reused by anybody rather than just by themselves. Cool. So that's the stored procedure. So I'm just going to pass in a parameter which accepts like an 800 product code and for 1st of October 2021, and I'll run that, and that gives me 87 rows. Now we have replicated that data in the Battlefish endpoint. So I'm going to connect to my Battlefish endpoint, and I'm going to run the same procedure. Let's see what it does. Here we go, 87 rows. Folks, no difference whatsoever. I'm talking SQL Server on Aurora Postgres. How amazing is that?
That's very cool. I'm impressed, Asif.
Cool. I'm glad you liked it. So
yeah,
folks,
for sure.
That's what I want to show now. So I'll just open it for any questions, Gunnar, you might have, or want to pick up some questions from the audience.
Yeah, there's a comment from TopSwag Code about a specific table that shows some magic mappings. Do you know what that is?
I would recommend to share sys.sys spt data type info table to share some of the magic mapping. That's very internal and deep down, my friend. That's why don't you just write to me, and then possibly I would then sync up with you offline and see how we can help you more about this, or reach out to Gunnar and then possibly we'll arrange something for you.
I think he's meaning that is visible in your Postgres. Yeah, his next comment is that he's already gone there and seen it. So,
exactly.
But perhaps we don't need to show it on screen, but I believe it's available so you can see it there.
Absolutely. I just don't want to take a dive into the word down to the like level 400 or just a bit deeper. So some of the audience might just go, "Ooh, what these guys are up to." So that's a very nice comment there. So why don't we just say, if you have any questions, you want to dive a bit deeper into that table and how that table maps stuff like that, then we can talk about that. But probably this is not the right forum to do so.
All right, cool. So starting to reach time to wrap up. Asif, I think let's just do a quick brief of what we covered in this session.
Lovely. So folks, what we said, we talked about what is Babelfish, how Battlefish came about. We dived into what Battlefish development tenants are, how we are supporting the Battlefish TDS protocol, the error codes, and the correctness of the Battlefish when it comes to SQL Server, Battlefish use cases. When do you want to bring the Battlefish into play? When you have a legacy application core where you don't have a lot of support and you want to do this migration without having to do a lot of transformation. That is good for Babelfish. At the same time, we looked at the Compass, the compatibility assessment tool, how it helps customers to do the homework, our groundwork before the migration kicks off. That tells you how compatible your database is currently with Battlefish, so that's a good starting point. And then we looked at the demo where we looked at how we moved away from SQL Server into Battlefish without having to do a lot of changes, and we saw the .NET application. So the key benefits I want to call out very briefly, Gunnar, if I may. So if you look at currently the key benefits when it comes to SQL Server versus Aurora PostgreSQL, at the moment you can only go up to 5 read replicas. And then every time you create a read replica, you will have to pay for license, because that's how Microsoft have done the licensing. So if you're looking at read scalability, Aurora would be the key thing to look at, because you want to control the cloud benefit, basically pay what you use, scale as you grow, and shrink back as you shrink. And that's something Aurora offers out of the box in terms of read scalability. And that's the biggest gain point, if you ask me, breaking away from SQL Server. I'm not tied up to 5 read replicas. I'm not paying for my read replicas anymore in terms of licensing. I'm using Aurora. And then it comes to Aurora, you can start utilizing the features like global database, fast cloning functionality, because at the moment, if I do the snapshot and restore, I'm looking at about a day before my non-production environments are ready. So with the Aurora, we have fast cloning functionality under 10 minutes, regardless of the size of the data. That's there. You can, to reduce the licensing completely, you can say, I was paying 120 core license on SQL Server at the moment. Come Aurora, literally 0 core licensing, because Aurora is open source. But what you're paying for, only for compute. Again, the key point is you can scale up and down as and when go. And then good news is Aurora Serverless V2 is coming. When the V2 comes, that's when you will realize the true power of cloud computing with AWS, that you will only pay for what you use, rather than having to provision for peak workloads and having to pay for massive licensing. That's going to go away. And the good thing is Babelfish is open source. So you have a major say into what you want to see in the future, rather than somebody telling you that this is what you want to see in the future. So folks, while you have a chance, go and register on the open source Babelfish portal. Start telling us what you want to see in the Babelfish.
Great stuff, Asif. Thank you very much for joining today. And if you have any additional questions, Asif, I know you're on LinkedIn, so people can reach out there. And if you're on Twitter, you can reach me at Gunnar Grosch as well. Please, any comments, questions. I've also posted a link to a survey in the chat, so please help us by filling that out as well. All right. With that, Asif, thank you very much for joining. Thanks to everyone watching as well, and I will see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gunnar. It was a privilege to have to be on this show. Looking forward to the next one. Cheers then. Folks, bye.